Welcome everyone to today's Aurora Institute Symposium 2020 virtual session. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Susan Patrick. I'm the CEO of Aurora Institute and I'll be moderating today's session. As you may know, we had to shift our in-person symposium to virtual events in the wake of COVID. We'll be hosting a virtual symposium on October 26th through 28th, so please save the dates. And we're also hosting an all-fall series of webinars. We're so pleased that you've joined us for today's webinar. We hope you'll join us and keep in mind the 20 sessions over 15 weeks that we're hosting to learn from and participate in. Today's webinar is on such an important topic. We're looking at strengthening the learning relationships between teachers, families, and students. We're going to look at the Power My Learning framework, interventions, and evaluation efforts across the research. Please know this session is part of a special research series that we're doing virtually on building the evidence base for K-12 personalized learning. Next slide, please. Please use the chat box to introduce yourself, ask questions, make comments, and to share solutions or any insights and resources from your own experiences. We hope that we're learning from each other. So those of you participating, please stay involved. We also invite you to share what you're learning on Twitter using hashtag Aurora2020 and tagging us at Aurora-INST. Be sure to stay connected. This way we can extend the learning beyond the session and share our insights with our own networks, peers, and learning communities. Please note today's session will be recorded and archived on the Aurora Institute Symposium website. We'll send you a follow-up email after the webinar within the next few days with the slides and the recording. So without further ado, now I will hand it over to the Power My Learning team. Emily, thank you.
Thanks, Susan. We can take the next slide. So thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. And as Susan said, this session is on strengthening learning relationships between teachers, families, and students. My name is Emily Amick. I am the Director of Professional Learning at Power My Learning, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues who will also introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Stock. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Power My Learning.
Hi everyone, my name is Mariela Hernandez. I am a professional learning specialist with Power My Learning and support teachers in LA, and I coach them directly. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for joining us in this session. We are excited to share a couple objectives with you. So in this session, you'll gain an understanding of Power My Learning's research-based interventions for strengthening the triangle of learning relationships between students, parents, family partners, and teachers. You'll also explore the successes and challenges of our evaluation efforts, including our research partnerships, strategic evidence plan, and impact studies. There will be a time for an open Q&A at the end where we'll answer chat questions and take others from the audience. We ask that you submit all comments and questions using the chat function. Next slide, please. At Power My Learning, we believe in the power of students, teachers, and families working together. Let's start off by reflecting on our own experiences of family engagement. As you read this prompt, think about one time when you saw a family support their child's learning, either your own family or as an educator. What did that feel like? What made that moment memorable? We'll take 30 seconds to think before we start sharing. This should give you enough time to read the prompt at your own time. After 30 seconds are up, we'll share in the chat. And I have a timer ready for 30 seconds. You have 10 more seconds to think. All right, and we're done. We're going to start sharing, so feel free to start writing in the chat box. Please share a few words in the chat to respond to the questions on the screen. How does family engagement feel when it's effective, and what makes these interactions powerful? And don't be shy as you're thinking or as you're reflecting on these family engagement moments. Thank you so much. I hope it's Susan or Susan for your reflection. I've definitely seen that in my own time as a teacher. Oh, that sounds like such a wonderful, empowering experience for everyone involved. That sounds awesome. Courtney, I definitely connect to that. And thank you all for writing all these responses. I see commonalities around family engagement being something that changes student outcomes. Thank you for indulging us in this activity, and Emily will tell you more about Power My Learning. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kim and Diane and Elliot.
Thanks, Marielle, and thanks to everyone who shared their own experiences and really what this, the feelings that are evoked when families are engaged in students' learning. I do want to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Power My Learning is a national nonprofit. We were founded in 1999, and our focus is on strengthening the learning relationships between students, teachers, and families so that all students can succeed. Over the past school year, during the time of school closures, we've all seen that family engagement has assumed even greater importance than ever before. And schools that were previously maybe treating family engagement as a box to check off have really had to reassess their structures and their policies around how they engage families and even their beliefs. So we believe that families are critical team members, and that when teachers and students and families collaborate on the same learning goals, students thrive academically and social emotionally. So at Power My Learning, we really strive to create equitable learning experiences for students by supporting their families and their teachers. And we've been doing this work for over 20 years. We can move to the next slide. So when we work with schools and districts, that work takes a couple different forms, but we work providing educator workshops, coaching, and workshops directly to families. And we also have developed an award-winning innovation that we call family playlists. Family playlists are multilingual, mobile-friendly homework assignments that have students teach what they're learning to a family partner at home. So you'll get to see a sneak peek of those later. You can go to the next slide. All of the work that we do with teachers is grounded in our framework for teachers, which I'm really excited to preview for you today. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Thanks. So what you're looking at here is a visual overview of the Power My Learning framework for teachers. And we recently revised our framework so that it better reflects our commitment to this strong triangle of learning relationships. We were working on these revisions well before school closures due to COVID, but we've seen that our framework is resonating, especially with school leaders and with teachers during this time. Let me orient you quickly to what you're looking at here. On the left column, you can see 4 domains of teacher practice, and then across in the middle and right columns, you can see research-based best practices across each domain, both with students and with families. We know that sometimes working with families, engaging them in learning is seen as something that's kind of an add-on or a one-off, but we really believe that family engagement can be integrated into teacher practice in a way that makes teachers' works easier and it makes their practice stronger. So the framework provides strategies, resources, practices that help teachers think about how to authentically partner with families across each of these domains. So we're talking about creating a safe and productive learning environment, planning and delivering rigorous and engaging instruction, using data to drive our decision making, and helping students develop agency over their own learning. And we saw in the chat some examples of people talking about how family engagement can really support students in developing agency. So the framework is grounded in several core concepts, equity, social emotional learning, family engagement, and culturally responsive teaching. And the practices included are based on the research of thought leaders in each of these fields. So we lean really heavily on Karen Mapp in the family engagement arena. In the area of culturally responsive teaching, we lean on the work of Zaretta Hammond, Geneva Gay, and others. So I think if you look through the framework, you'll see some of those ideas really coming through, shining through. You can download the full framework for yourself to look at it more closely at powermylearning.org, and I think that's a / framework. So you can definitely go there. I'm going to preview just a couple of indicators, a couple of these practices for you, though, as we move on to the next slide. So for each indicator that is on that overview page, there is a full page like this one that you're looking at now, right? And it includes detailed examples of artifacts, teacher behaviors, student or family behaviors, and each of these can really be thought of as a strategy or a resource that a teacher can employ. So this is the inclusive community indicator, and this sits within the learning environment domain. This is an indicator that is attentive to helping students feel a sense of belonging in the learning community. So the practices outlined here include things like teachers reflecting on their cultural lens to consider their own implicit biases. It also includes things like modeling and marking healthy social emotional interactions like displays of empathy. And also things related to restorative conflict resolution. So this indicator is really just all about creating a safe and nurturing space in which all students can learn. If you look up on the top left of the page, you can see an icon that shows us that this particular indicator is lighting up that teacher to student side of the triangle. So if we go to the next slide, I want to show you a pair of indicators. These indicators are from our student agency domain. And this is just a great example of how the practices with students that you can see in the top and the first indicator, and then the practices with families in the second indicator, how they really bolster and support one another. So these are both about learning conversations, right? And learning conversations are an important way for students to process information, to learn from each other, and to leverage the power of learning by teaching others. But we know that often only some students are engaging in these conversations, and then they're the only ones reaping these benefits. So these indicators really help teachers think about how they can support learning conversations that all students can engage in, both in school and at home. So the practices with students, they include really concrete strategies, right? Things like including processing time before you ask students to discuss, like Marielle modeled for us with her prompt about family engagement, giving us time to process, varying the discussion structures so that all students participate, and modeling behaviors that signal attentive listening, for example. So these are just some concrete strategies. And these practices are relevant both in-person and in online learning environments. Then we move to the with families indicator, right, which includes strategies designed to help family partners understand how they can support their child's learning through conversations, even when they're not a content expert themselves, right? So when kids teach someone else, they're not just helping that person learn. They're not just showing what they know, right? They're actually deepening their own understanding, and they're retaining concepts longer when they do that teaching, right? So we know this from research and from our own experiences as learners and as educators. So the goal of this opportunity is to extend that opportunity to, or of this indicator rather, is to extend that chance to learn by teaching to the home. Go ahead to the next slide, Elizabeth. So I hope what you saw there just with those two quick examples is that the framework really provides some guidance for teachers to connect the learning relationships from them in the bottom left vertex of the triangle there to students, right, at the top, and also along the base to families. And then we also, work directly with families to really help them light up that side on the right, the students to families side. And this resource is an example of one that we share with them that helps them facilitate conversations at home, for example. But now I want to hand it off to Elizabeth so that she can show you one of our innovations that lights up the entire triangle.
Thank you so much, Emily. Let me just advance the slide. Okay, so now we're going to go to family playlists, and I'm excited to do a quick little demo for all of you, and I'd like to invite all of you to join along. So in order to join with me, if you can take your phone, your cell phone, and go to either joinpml.org or click on or take that QR code. You'll fill in a form and it'll quickly give you what you're seeing on the right here, which is the phone with the different steps. So I'm going to go do it with you so that we give us all enough time.
Let us know if you need any additional support.
Okay. All right, so I've been able to fill in my form and get to submit, but I'll give a few more minutes for folks to just catch up to me. Okay, so hopefully all of you are seeing on your phone what you see here on the right. I'm going to actually pull that up in a different format here. So this is actually a simulator. And so what you see here are, this is our family playlist. And the way this
Hey, Elizabeth,
yes.
we don't see it.
Oops, let me
If
try.
you share your screen, we're looking at the gallery view
Got it.
still.
Okay,
Yep.
so sorry about that. I am caught up with all of you guys now. So here is what you should all be seeing in your phone. And the way a family member or parent gets to see this in their phone is I'm going to just give you like a use case. So let's suppose I am a teacher. My name is Miss Rhoda, and I'm a 5th grade math teacher, and we're doing a unit on coordinate plane. So toward the tail end of that unit, I can assign a family playlist to all of my students. When that family playlist is assigned, a text message then goes out to all of the family, all of my students' family partner. And a family partner could be a parent, it could be an uncle, it can be an aunt, and it can go out in English, it can go out in Spanish, it can go out in more than 100 languages. When the parent then clicks on this link, that's when the family playlist will then load in their web browser. They do not have to download an app, they do not have to put in a password, they don't have to put in a username. So the first 3 steps of this playlist, the dark blue, learn, practice, and check, those are done by the student independently. They can be done on their parent's phone if that's the only device they have in their home. A student can also just pull up the family playlist through their own dashboard. And the first step is learn, which is a little video to help remind the student about coordinate plane. It's about a 2-3 minute video. Then the student gets to do practice, where they get to play a little game, practicing coordinate plane. And the next step is check. And so here the student gets asked a couple of questions that are multiple choice questions, and they answer them, and it gives them immediate feedback on whether they got it right or wrong, and tips if they didn't get it correct. So these 3 steps that you've just seen, these are like what all ed tech companies do. So there's no magic here. This is basically good pedagogical practice in the ed tech space. The magic of family playlists actually happens in this next step called family exploration. Because now what happens is the family playlist asks the student to go get a piece of paper in their home, sit down with their family partner, mom, dad, or whomever that might be, draw the x-axis together, draw the y-axis, plot their apartment or their home at the 0, 0, and plot other buildings in their neighborhood on the piece of paper. They're then asked, are there more buildings in quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4? And then tell me about a typical day of your family partner going about the neighborhood. Make sure to use the coordinates when you're answering the question. And that question gets answered in here. So here's the student response. Today's a busy day for my mom. She has to go deliver some mail. And then the mom can also take photographs of what they've done together. So here's a photograph of the coordinate plane. And here is a photograph of a selfie, because that started happening. The students are like, let me show you my mom who I'm doing this with, which is very cool. And the last step is family feedback. But before I share more about family feedback, I just want to dive in a little bit more on the family exploration piece that we're just talking about. Because it's important to note that these activities are actually offline. We're purposely choosing offline activities for kids to do with their families at home, in part because we believe that you develop stronger relationships with people when you're not staring at screens. It's when you're staring at each other in each other's eyes and doing activities with manipulatives. The other thing that's important about this is we're building upon something called the protege effect, or learning by teaching. And you guys all know that old adage that you don't really know something until you can teach it to someone. Well, it turns out that that's true, and there's a ton of research around it, that when you teach something to someone else, you both learn it better and you recall it better. So we're trying to piggyback on that research base in this piece of the family playlist. Then the last step is then the family partner, in this case mom, then answers a couple of yes/no questions like, did my child seem to understand the content? Did my child enjoy the assignment? Did the activity help me understand my child's learning in school? And the final step is to answer an open response box which says, Miss Rhoda would love to hear your thoughts. Please share any comments or questions. And in this case, mom wrote, Clay had a little trouble understanding this content, but he's getting the hang of it. It was nice to work with him on his homework so I could fully understand what he's doing in class. It was good to get some good knowledge back from my great big boy. And then the mom hits submit. Now, I want to point out that this open response box, when we rolled this out, I personally expected no one to fill it in, because I never fill in open response boxes that are completely optional. You know, if I'm not going to get credit and I'm expected to form a cogent sentence, I'm like, no, I don't think that sounds good. But what we found is that families fill this in like crazy. And they put in all sorts of information about where their child's struggling. They put in information that's filled with pride about their child's learning. It's been really wonderful to see what families respond, how families respond. And now I'll quickly just show you what it looks like from a teacher's perspective. So this is now the teacher report on the exact same family playlist that I just showed you. This is the data that you're seeing in here is real data that came from the year that we piloted family playlist in 2017 with the school in the South Bronx. And now the family playlist is being shown horizontally instead of vertically. So these are the same steps we were walking through. And then now each of these rows is now a student. So you can see, this is from a teacher view, these are the same photos I showed you of the mom and that coordinate plane. And some other really nice things that are valuable about this report is if a family member writes into the teacher in a language other than English, the teacher can then convert that. So this is the original in Spanish, and it converts it to English. And if the teacher then writes back again, it will convert it back to the language of choice. And there's just some really great data in here, like stories of hello again, I must say I really enjoy as well as look forward to family playlist. Not only does it show me my daughter's learning, but also keeps me on my toes, laugh out loud. Thanks again for the opportunity. So these are the types of feedback that we were receiving, and this is some of the real actual data. So let me go back to the deck now. Okay. And so I want to share, there's an evidence base that's underlying family playlists. When we were building out family playlists, we were looking across the research literature to look for programs that had real evidence that they were moving the needle on student mastery and on social emotional learning skills. And the program we found that we really fell in love with was one out of Johns Hopkins called the TIPS program, which stands for Teachers Involving Parents in Schoolwork. And that's a paper-based program. So all those same steps, those 5 steps, are on a piece of paper. This is the front and the back. And when you're doing it with paper, you can't really translate so well. So it's a little bit more difficult. And it's very hard for the teacher to see all the data at once. So we felt like here was a really great opportunity for us to take an evidence base and build from that. And so we asked Stephen Sheldon, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins, to advise us on the development of family playlists so we can ensure the fidelity of those core components of the TIPS model. And now I'm going to turn it over to Marielle to share more.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for guiding us through the demo. And feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We'll get to them during the Q&A at the end. As a learning professional and coach, I've had the privilege of supporting students and teachers through the family playlist process. I'll guide you through 3 slides full of really cute kid pictures, as well as comments from students and parents. So family playlists leverage the protege effect, which Elizabeth defined, And this allows students to teach their family members what they're learning. For myself, I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I'm the daughter of immigrants, so I did a lot of this informally, and getting to do this through something like Family Playlist is a really great opportunity for students to feel like they're owning their learning while also having a meaningful activity to do the work. So in these pictures, students are building ramps of varying heights using objects around the house to teach their families about potential and kinetic energy. Here you can see examples of student response and family member comment. As you saw in the demo, students can submit pictures, videos, and text responses. I worked with middle schoolers, and a couple of them were very shy about selfies, but once they got in the groove, they were really cute to look at. Something I really appreciate about these activities is that learning comes alive, and it's fun to see students become leaders and guide their parents through what they're learning in class. Next slide, please. And one teacher, this is an example of a student, and you'll see his mom, Miss Diaz's comment. It's in Spanish and in English, and we're excited to show you and just tell you more about this, because this teacher loved the ramp example because this parent, Miss Diaz, is very involved in her son's learning. However, not all of the teachers at the school speak Spanish, so it's sometimes difficult for her to participate fully in the school community. The built-in translation capabilities and Family Playlist made it easier for someone like Ms. Diaz to have meaningful two-way communication with her son's teachers. It's also really helps because when parents are filling out the family exploration or the family responses, it's a less of a barrier to entry because they can write it in their native language, whether it's Spanish, Vietnamese, or other languages. It allows the teacher to see the text in English. So this allows this teacher or other teachers using Family Playlist to be able to engage in really great conversation with parents like Ms. Diaz. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, this parent is Tyria. She shares, Tyria needs more help, seems a little confused. I will continue to help her as much as I can. So students as early as kinder can participate in playlists. Here you see an example of a kinder activity on comparing number of objects using the words more than, less than, and the same amount as. It's really important to include parents as partners in the learning and teaching process. So getting Tyria's mom's feedback helps the teacher align her material and better serve her students. This is also very valuable data that the teacher cannot get in the classroom. Parents can provide meaningful feedback to teachers through playlists. These interactions support teacher and family relationships, which ultimately support student learning. I was a second grade teacher for a few years, and this is the type of data that I really wanted to use in my classroom. And as Elizabeth showed you, there's parents individually can send these out, but as a teacher, you see all the reports, and this is something that really helps, especially in finding smaller gaps that students may not show in the classroom. I hope this was helpful, and Elizabeth will now share more about our research efforts. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Maria. So now onto our research and evaluation, and I'm going to go pretty quick just in order to save time for questions and answer. So we were part of a program with Project Evident, which is a nonprofit. Project Evident was helping other nonprofits build something called a strategic evidence plan. And so we were one of only 3 organizations, and actually the only one focused on education, that was selected by Project Evidence to build a strategic evidence plan in their very first round. And so as part of that, we had 3 learning goals for learning more about Family Playlists. And our learning goals are these boxes on the left. So it was teacher adoption. We wanted to optimize the adoption process for teachers that were assigning Family Playlists. Triangle of learning relationships. We wanted to optimize the triangle of learning relationships between students, teachers, and families. And then really understanding our impact on academic mastery and social emotional learning outcomes. So we wanted to build on the evidence base and really demonstrate impact. So I'm just going to walk you through these 3 learning goals one by one to just share with you like how we moved through it and what we've learned. So the first one is learning goal, teaching adoption. So these are the steps we did in our first year of rolling out the strategic evidence plan. First, we had to define implementation categories. And what I mean by that is how far along is a teacher in getting to the point where they've adopted. And so we then came up with definitions of those so that we could then see where a teacher was getting stuck. So that was very helpful to us because before that, it was hard for us to all have the same language. And then what we did is we collected feedback from our field staff. And our field staff were saying, you know, it's really important that were providing personalized support for teachers. So we used that to then decide to do a mini little random control trial. We did it with 150 teachers, and we found that we could increase adoption, or that the teachers who got personalized messages increased their adoption. It's not a big surprise. We all know that personalization makes a difference. So for us, it wasn't like a big, oh, aha, personalization makes a difference. It was more like, oh my goodness, we actually conducted a random control trial and we did it well and it worked. So that was what we were doing here. And then we were able to then roll out personalized automated emails when the teacher hits the milestone to prompt her or him to the next step. So in terms of the triangle of learning relationships, in this case, the only step we've gotten to is really defining the metrics to measure the triangle of learning relationships. We were hoping to have gotten farther along with this, but the pandemic actually got in our way. And so in terms of those metrics, here's examples across all different steps of the triangle. So on the teacher-student side, we were able to see that 88% of teachers say they gained a more holistic understanding of their students. So that's a survey question and the results that are from that survey. And then on the students to family side, 93% of parents reported that they enjoyed working on family playlists with their child. And on the teacher to family side, 86% of teachers say they strengthen their connections with students' families. So we're very interested in thinking about, like, are these the right questions for us to have on our survey? Should we have other questions? Like, are we phrasing them correctly? But this is what we've done so far. And then on the impact on academic mastery and social emotional learning outcomes, we actually made a lot more progress there more quickly than we expected. And we were able to run a study. It was our first rigorous study of 7th grade math students. And we were able to show that a statistically significant impact of family playlists on math test scores with an effect size of 0.33. And that's about equivalent to about 4 additional months of learning. So we were pretty excited with that. You know, we're excited to see both the results and that we ourselves were able to run that study on our own. And in terms of social emotional skills, this is an area that's still in progress. So we have a couple of anecdotal, I mean, we have some survey data, but we haven't yet figured out exactly how to study this in a more rigorous way. And so far we've seen that 86% of teachers say their students became more aware of themselves as learners. So that's the SEL skill of self-awareness and growth mindset. And we saw 91% of teachers saying it helped their students take on the perspective of other learners as they prepare to teach, which is connected to the SEL skill of social awareness. And so how we are organizationally in terms of our own data culture, before the strategic evidence plan, I'd say we were at like, hi Jacob, sorry, my son is here. Jacob, can you go talk to Daddy for a minute?
I can't, Jacob, I need you. Come on, give mommy some.
Sorry about that. That is the pandemic for us all. So before before we did the strategic evidence plan, I'd say we were about a 2 out of 10. And then our current state, I'd say we're now more like an 8 out of 10. And the progress we've made to date is we built an operational data store with Power BI for data visualization. We restructured our staff. We actually hired a data fellow to lead our research efforts. She's fabulous. We identified experts to support research design and analysis. And then what's left to get us from 8 to 10 is we need to connect various data sources to see how different variables are affecting one another. Right now we're living in this world where we have these islands of data. We're trying to interconnect them all and also continue to extend our data culture. We are now up to Q&A, so I'm excited to hear everyone's questions.
Great, thank you so much. That was terrific. The first question came in earlier from Paul Leather. Paul Leather is asking about, this was really early on when you were talking about the relationship between students and teachers and parents. So have you addressed the issues of relative power between educators and parents, particularly for students and parents on the margins?
Take myself off mute. That's a great question. Yes, that is absolutely something we need to be thinking about. I'm going to actually turn that over to Emily or to Marielle to see if they want to participate in the answer to this question.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks, Paul, for the question. I think it is something that we're attentive to internally, right? That we think about a lot and talk about a lot. And we try to address that in terms of, so some of the indicators in our framework, for example, are about building relationships with families and also developing kind of a cultural responsiveness and an awareness of families, and inviting them to be more present in so many ways, like present physically or online, but also just to share things about their home that can be incorporated into the classroom and things like that. A lot of the work of addressing things like power differentials honestly happens in the context of the coaching relationships, more so than just in a document that we can hand over to teachers, or even in a workshop. You know, for example, we have an educator workshop on teaming up with families, but I always think of our workshops as a starting point, you know, not at any point. So yeah, it's not a fully coherent example. I can look for examples in the framework to be a little bit more specific. Mariel, do you have experiences working with teachers on family engagement that you want to share?
Yeah, definitely. So what I do is I typically work with a set of teachers at a variety of schools. I've worked with private schools, Catholic schools, charter schools, regular public schools, and I've noticed that a lot of the times teachers are open to family engagement. So they're like, oh, great, we have an open house, but parents may not have shown up. And so something that I do is I have conversations around that and say like, oh, can we think of some reasons, like what are some of the contexts, what are some of the things that might make these opportunities like really great, but also not as applicable to all parents. And so through a lot of the conversations that I have, I'm sort of supporting the mindset of parents are really important. And as educators, like, let's bring them in because it can be a really intimidating process. And I've already shared that I'm first in my family to go to college. My parents were not the type to go in and ask questions of schools. So I have just personal conversations where I maybe share like, oh, this is so great. And I could also see how my parents would be very intimidated by this. How could we really think about all parents when we're doing this type of activity? And something I really tell teachers, I really lean on my own experience saying like, when you have parents in your corner and you're working as a team, your life will be so much better. So I really encourage those teachers to really bring in parents, because sometimes it can feel like, oh, parents aren't doing the things, but I like really think of like, how can I really incentivize this for the teacher, because parents are so valuable. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have a question from Elliot. Can your tools accommodate students progressing at different paces? Are teachers using it in that way? If yes, is promoting that part of your default approach, is that promoting that part of your default approach, or does it happen more based on each teacher's initiative?
Sure. So I'll dig in on this one first and then turn it over to the rest of the team. So family playlists can be used for students who are at different places or at different pacing. We do allow teachers to modify them, and so they can save a family playlist for different groups of students if they want to. But our thinking about it is that these are really meant to be used as end of unit assignments, because it's at the end of the unit that you would want a student to teach their family partner what they've been learning. And our expectation is that while students may progress at different paces to get to the end of the unit, that they all will arrive around the same time, so that end of the unit assignment can be the same one. So I think most teachers are assigning the same assignment to all their students because it's end of unit, but in some instances they are breaking them into groups when they're making assignments. And I'll let Emily and Marielle add to that if they have more to share.
Yeah, I can just note that we have seen some notable examples of teachers differentiating using family playlists. Often for students who are learning English, they may have different playlists that address different, English language skills, grammar skills, punctuation skills, things like that, that they think that, based on where students are progressing in their learning, that they're ready for. And so all students may end up completing the same playlist, but it may be assigned to them at different times. For example, that's one example I can think of.
All right, there's a question from Christine. I'm curious whether or not your amazing framework and tool has been used in different contexts with healthcare practitioners, servicing persons with substance use and mental health issues, for example, or in the context of clinical practice.
Another terrific question. We have not been formally encouraging that, but there have been leaders of other nonprofits who've reached out to me who are very interested in that. I would say one thing that's been really fascinating for me is, I've been doing this now for 20 years, and for the vast majority of my time in my position, when I would go to conferences or gatherings, particularly ones that funders would put together, I'd be surrounded by other people also in the education space. And then more recently, I was involved in a group that the Results for America, which is a nonprofit based in DC, that they put together of nonprofit leaders. And I was one of only 3 leaders of an education nonprofit, and others were in all these different sectors, whether it was criminal justice or health. And so I would say my big aha by being amongst all those different folks from different sectors is that it felt to me like everyone else got how important relationships were in terms of making modifications in behavior, whether it is something around like drug addiction or it's something else. And it felt to me like in the education space, we were barely talking about it. Like, it was maybe talked about, I was like way down on the list in terms of importance. And so I think that the folks who get that relationships matter for the work they're doing will find the work we're doing in the education space of interest. And so, yes, if you're interested in using these tools, we're interested in talking to you, because I think we all are sharing the same thing in common, which is that it's through relationships, in the context of relationships, that we change.
Thank you. There's another question. I really see application of your tool for helping move education towards a skills-based curriculum. Does the tool integrate with learning management systems?
Sure. So right now we have an integration with Google Classroom. We also have an integration with Clever, and we are in the process of building integrations with other LMSs. So yes, we see the same thing you're seeing, and we're very interested in those kinds of integrations.
Great. I have another question, Elizabeth. With COVID-19, we have so many students that are learning remotely, that are using online learning. Power My Learning has been a great online tool for many years now. So you were actively engaged in this work pre-COVID. And now with COVID, I imagine you're seeing just more and more and some trends. And I know how data-driven all of the work that you do. And I'm just wondering, are there some lessons learned more broadly that can be helpful for the field? So one example I'll give is we're trying to track the schools and the districts that actually made the shift to remote learning more smoothly, quickly, some within 24 hours, tended to have some pretty strong practices that were competency-based, with strong student agency, where students were goal setting and doing reflective practices in the classroom, outside of the classroom. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing in terms of lessons learned in this COVID era.
Sure, I can share a few. So we've had on our professional development side of our work, we were working very directly with teachers during the building closures. So we were able to learn quite a bit from working with teachers, in different parts of the country. And I would say, I actually had the opportunity to speak at a conference where there were only superintendents attending. And so I brought together my team of folks who'd been working directly with teachers. And I said to them, if you had a magic wand and you could tell a superintendent anything to make things better during this pandemic and the building closures, what would it be? And the kinds of things I heard from my team were the following, which is a lot of times in families when there's multiple kids, the older kids are actually helping their younger siblings with their schoolwork from home, because mom and dad are trying to get their work done. And so if they could wave a magic wand, they'd say to a superintendent, do your synchronous learning. Like if you're going to do Zoom calls or Google Meet calls or, whatever team calls, do those for the younger kids in the morning, do them for the older kids in the afternoon, because that way the older siblings can help their younger siblings. So really think, like, instead of us thinking about students as these units, we need to think about them inside families and how they're interacting with each other. So that was one example. I also heard from my team that there were many teachers who, when they were doing their synchronous learning with their students, they were thinking initially, oh, I'm going to do some instruction. And then they discovered, oh, actually, the time when we're all together should be spent on relationship building, should be spent upon celebrating wins. We also heard from teachers who were teaching the youngest kids. And this one was, it's not a surprise when you hear about it, but it's something we don't think about. What they were saying is that for the kids who are like middle school and high school, those kids typically have devices. So when they all got told, you're now not going to school, you're going to stay at home, they could still text their friends and do FaceTime with their friends. But for the little kids, like the kindergarten, first and second graders, they didn't have that. So they were really isolated very suddenly. And so for teachers who are bringing those kids together, they're finding that those kids just really need to be talking to each other because they don't have other ways to reach out to their peers. So there's just a lot of things we learned about relationships and about thinking about the situation that I thought were really valuable. On the family playlist side, we saw that family playlists like tripled in usage during the building closures. We heard from the teachers who were teaching the younger kids in particular. A lot of them said they felt miserable because they felt miserable that the only way they could do teaching with the little kids was online. They were like, I feel terrible that I'm putting these like kindergartners, these little guys, like in kindergartners and first graders in front of screens. And that's their only experience. And so they really loved the part about family playlists where the little ones are getting to teach their family partner doing something with manipulatives at home. So those were the kinds of things that we heard. And I'll turn it over to Emily and Marielle in particular, because Marielle was working with teachers during the building closures, and so was Emily, to share some additional learnings.
I will share one thing that was really great, actually, is that, teachers found that their learning curve for being distance learners themselves and for facilitating distance learning was not as steep as they anticipated prior to the school closures. I think if you had asked teachers in February, how do you think it would go if you had to teach all your classes online, they would have had heart attacks, collectively. But once it came to actually doing it, they found that, okay, they lost some of their tech phobia and became willing to pull down menus and click buttons and just kind of see what happens. And it was really helpful to them, I think, to have to be learners, to be in the position of being learners in this way and to understand how their students also, were kind of in this position of learning a new way of learning. So that was a great learning, to use the word again, but that was something I definitely walked away with.
Yeah, and I got the chance to really support teachers in the midst of I feel like it just felt like really uncharted territory, and I was going to schools. Usually my work was I would go to a school all day, support all the teachers, do observations, debriefs, and then one day it stopped. And so even for us, we went from seeing people in person sitting next to them to going virtual. And I think my biggest takeaway was less is more. I was part of that team that was helping Elizabeth talk to superintendents and really trying to gauge what is the student experience as well as the teacher experience. I think that during school closures, outside of the academics, there was just such a sense of ambiguity, of not knowing. And for teachers and students, it was really challenging. And so some of the really great things that I was able to support teachers with was really finding what was essential, what needed to be covered, and how to really frame things around synchronous and asynchronous learning. So for some teachers, like Emily said, the learning curve was it was very fast. They were okay, I'm going to do ed puzzles, and I'm going to video myself for 10 minutes describing the assignment, and this is what the kids are doing. And sort of they went from a teacher really holding their hand to then being more like college students, I feel like. And that was great, but I think it was also really awesome to think, okay, usually you would cover these 10 things. What is really needed to cover these standards? So maybe it's 5 things. And along with that, something that's already like been covered was finding that synchronous time to be a time of connection. So one of my teachers that I coached, he would use like morning, like discussion on their learning management system as like attendance. So he would have like all kinds of different prompts. Some of them were like fun, some of them were a little more serious. And a fun one was like, what would be, if I could give you in and out this morning, or today, what would be your order? And so that would be his way of like, his kids would be like, what is he gonna ask us today? Another day would be like, what if you were a superhero, what would you be and why? And I thought that was a really great way to sort of give them the sense of like consistency, that they were still connected to this teacher, even though they didn't see them, while also really trying to hit on the academics that were really important. So I think it was this mix of how do we support students? And then on my end as a coach, how do I support you? How do I empathize? And also just give you some actionable feedback that will help you, because this is a tough time. And now that we're going into a more permanent distance learning versus last year, I think we're really able to take a lot of these learnings and really apply them.
It's so interesting. I just had a conversation with a reporter who was asking about how ready students are, especially in elementary school, to move into this learning online. But what was curious is some of the follow-up questions were around what can teachers do to create effective learning environments during COVID at home, and the idea of peer collaboration and that protege effect on peer-to-peer collaboration came up. But it just seems like the student agency piece is so critical. I don't know if you have any insights on like in the work that you're doing around this peer collaboration, or can talk a little bit more about that protege effect of that collaboration with peers.
So I'll talk a little bit about the protege effect and then just turn it over to Emily. What's interesting, I'll just give you one quick story, which is that for those of us at Power My Learning who are parents, as we started to learn about this, we're like, oh, we can do this with our own kids. Like, even if our own school districts are not using family playlists. So many of us, as we were working with our own kids at home, instead of, if my daughter said, can you help me with this? I would say, well, why don't you teach it to me? So it's like it doesn't have to have, like, from a parent's perspective, you don't have to have a complicated tool to do this. For the information to flow between teacher, parent, and student, you do need to have some kind of a complicated system. But just for what you yourself as a parent can do with your own kids. And a lot of us started doing this, and we're seeing like amazing results, because many schools, districts, ed tech products, the role that they put parents in is the role of compliance officer. It's like, make sure your kids show up on time, make sure they're doing their homework, make sure that they're doing this, that, and the other. So your job is like, honey, did you do X, Y, Z? Or I saw on the parent portal that you got a 79. Why didn't you do as well? So all those prompts are like negative prompts. It's like, those aren't good ways to build relationships with your kid. And I think there's something about the protege effect, or allowing your kid to teach something to you, which breaks all of that down. And it allows you to have fun with your kid, and allows you to like build your relationship as learners together, instead of just being compliance officer. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever be compliance officer. You need a little bit of that too, but it's a balancing it out in this way that just is so much more productive for everybody. And I'll just let Emily talk as well, because I know collaborative learning is a big part of our framework.
Yeah.
And Emily, if it's okay, I'd just love to share an anecdote about family playlist before I forget. I think something that was really fun for me supporting a middle school teachers was having parents be just delighted to have quality time with their former elementary school kids that are now becoming teenagers. Like, that was really great for them. Like, the parents were like, oh my gosh, like, this is a really great way for us to talk. And it was also a really great way for the kids to be bossy and say, like, I'm giving my parents homework. And it was really fun for them to feel like they had that agency of, sometimes as a kid, especially a middle schooler, it's like, feels like everyone's telling you what to do. And so it was really fun for them to be like, haha, I have homework from my parent, and they have to like sit there and listen to me and do like an activity, whether it was with genetics, like we were doing these like wolves activity where it was like, okay, these are the phenotypes of the wolves, let's make a wolf baby. And so it was really great for kids to be able to explain like these genetic terms and then like draw with their parents, which was again, like for parents that don't necessarily speak the language, that's something that they could do. And they could also do more like of those like STEM activities like the ramps. So that's another part of like science, which was really great for them. So just wanted to share that kids really like giving their parents homework, and it was fun for them to have quality time together.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mariel. Yeah, I think I was thinking about the peer-to-peer collaboration that I know teachers really want to facilitate online or via hybrid learning. And, you know, one of the things that we're really that we recommend when we work with teachers is not skipping the team building components, right? I mean, if we want students to work together effectively, they need to build a community where they trust each other and know each other's names and you know, are comfortable asking each other questions and comfortable making mistakes in front of each other, you know. And so taking time both in the synchronous online, or if you get some in-person time, to really build those relationships between the students, you know, play some games together, some learning games, some trivia games together, name games together, you know, play body language Zoom games together, right? Like try to, you know, communicate something while everybody's on mute, or we play this game called the number game where you try to count up to 20, where, you know, just random people, somebody says 1 and then somebody says 2 and somebody says 3, but if you talk over each other, you have to start over, right? So we've got this gallery view here. Are we being attentive to other people's body language and to what they're communicating to us, and just really making that time to set those norms and build those relationships, so that then when you're asked to work together, you've got that foundation there to build on. The other kind of things that we definitely work with teachers are making sure that we're choosing activities, tasks that warrant collaboration. Right? There's nothing kills group work faster than a task that nobody needs to work on in a group, right? That's when you get everybody's heads down and they're just working on their own. And that happens in person, and it happens online too, or they just go off task because, you know, that's more fun. So really thinking about what are the learning objectives, what do I want students to be able to do, and how can I ask them to do it in a way that, you know, they benefit from having each other to lean on as they're doing that, so that it's not something that someone can do independently. So there's just a couple of things that we kind of think about, but, you know, the norms, the relationships, and then really making sure that what we're asking students to collaborate on is collaborative worthy.
Well, I love the focus on just strengthening the relationships and everything that the research says about wellness and emotional and social well-being. I just want to say with deep, deep gratitude, thanks to all of you. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us today, but please join me in thanking Elizabeth, Emily, Marielle. This has been such a tremendous session. Thanks for presenting. As a reminder, I just want to let everyone know that this session and the recording will be shared with you via email in the coming days. And we hope that you'll consider responding to our 1-minute survey. We'll put a link into the chat box for you about this webinar. We value your feedback, and we're always looking for ways that we can improve and serve the field with information and knowledge sharing. So we'll hope you'll continue to join us again for the upcoming symposium sessions listed on our website, and our virtual conference that will be happening over 3 days, October 26th through 28th. Please check out our website and follow our social media channels. Thanks to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks for joining us here at Aurora Institute. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Aurora team.